What went wrong with Jack Reacher? Never Go Back. The biggest difference between the Jack Reacher novel series and the film adaptations is the controversial casting of Tom Cruise as Jack Reacher, a former military cop turned drifter who is portrayed in the novels as being a muscular behemoth of a man, the complete opposite of Cruise, whose sheer handsomeness also marks a stark departure from author Lee Child's original vision for the rugged character. Regardless, Cruise's star power propelled the first film, which grossed nearly $220 million at the worldwide box office, to modest box office success. However, given that it failed to even get near the blockbuster success of Cruise's Mission Impossible series and was greeted with muted excitement by audiences and critics, it was mildly surprising when, in 2013, a sequel, Jack Reacher, Never Go Back, was put into development. This turned out to be a mistake. Bland, formulaic, and awash in contrived sentimentality, Jack Reacher, Never Go Back is a functional, passionless sequel that resembles a lavish CBS procedural pilot in terms of its lack of ambition and uninspired direction, rather than a would-be franchise-boosting sequel intended to launch the film series to impressive new heights. Released in 2016, the commercial and critical failure of the sequel brought the film series to a screeching halt. The only positive aspect of the sequel's failure was that it inspired the franchise's eventual rebirth in 2022 with the debut of the Prime Video television series Reacher, which has subsequently overshadowed the film series to the point of making it seem irrelevant. Never Go Back was the wrong choice for a Jack Reacher sequel. Jack Reacher, Never Go Back is based on the 2013 novel Never Go Back, the 18th installment in the novel series, in which Reacher goes on the run with an army major who's been framed for espionage, while also contending with a teenage girl who claims that he is her biological father. While the parental subplot functions quite distantly in the novel in relation to the novel's main thriller plot, the film places great importance on whether the girl, Samantha, is Reacher's daughter. This relationship, in conjunction with Reacher's pairing in the movie with Major Susan Turner, subverts his essential lone wolf persona, which hadn't yet been established strongly enough for audiences to be subverted in a sequel. The mixture of family drama and thriller within a road trip plot doesn't work as a sequel concept. In terms of exploring his personal life, it would have been much better suited to being the third or fourth film in the series. This miscalculation is especially baffling given that the Jack Reacher franchise presently encompasses 28 novels, several of which would have made for better sequel adaptations than Never Go Back. Because Christopher McQuarrie, director of Jack Reacher, was unable to direct the sequel due to other commitments, Tom Cruise turned it over to Edward Zwick. Zwick previously directed Cruise in the 2003 epic period action drama film The Last Samurai, which was a commercial and critical success. However, Zwick's fundamental misunderstanding of the franchise and its core audience resulted in an uncertain tone that left audiences unsatisfied. Instead of focusing primarily on the action thriller elements of the source material, Zwick placed great emphasis on family drama in the sequel in terms of his relationship with a teenage girl who may or may not be his daughter. Zwick was influenced by the 1973 road comedy drama film Paper Moon, in which Ryan O'Neal and daughter Tatum O'Neal play characters who experience a similar relationship dynamic against the backdrop of the Great Depression. In his 2024 memoir Hits, Flops, and Other Illusions, Zwick took responsibility for the sequel's failure. Zwick wrote, "When Jack Reacher, Never Go Back hit theaters in 2016, fans of Lee Child's best-selling novels and the previous Jack Reacher movie had high expectations. The first film, Jack Reacher 2012, starring Tom Cruise, had been a surprise hit. It was a lean, intense thriller that, despite some controversy over Cruise's casting, captured much of the character's essence from the books. However, the sequel failed to live up to its predecessor and disappointed both critics and audiences." So, what exactly went wrong with Jack Reacher, Never Go Back? A weak, formulaic story. One of the biggest issues with Never Go Back was its uninspired and generic plot. Unlike the first film, which had a tightly wound mystery and sharp character moments, the sequel fell into cliché action movie territory. The story follows Reacher as he investigates a military conspiracy while also dealing with a possible daughter he never knew about. Instead of feeling like a gripping thriller, the movie plays out like a standard, forgettable action flick. The novel Never Go Back is one of the stronger books in Lee Child's series, but the film adaptation stripped away much of the depth and complexity that made it engaging. The conspiracy angle is predictable, the villains are generic, and the stakes never feel particularly high. The first Jack Reacher film had a clever, methodical approach to storytelling, but this sequel felt like a watered-down version of better action films. Lackluster direction and action sequences. One of the key differences between Jack Reacher 2012 and its sequel was the director. Christopher McQuarrie directed the first film, bringing a sense of precision and tension that made the action sequences memorable. His ability to blend suspense, detective work, and hard-hitting combat gave Jack Reacher an identity. For Never Go Back, Edward Zwick took over as director. Zwick has made some excellent films, Glory, The Last Samurai, but his style didn't suit the Jack Reacher franchise. The action in Never Go Back felt uninspired, with choppy editing and bland choreography. The fights lacked the brutal efficiency that defined Reacher's combat style in the first movie. Instead of the raw, bone-crunching fights that fans expected, the action sequences were generic and forgettable. A misguided attempt at emotion. Another misstep was the attempt to add an emotional core to Reacher's character. In the books, Reacher is a drifter, a loner who moves from town to town solving problems and then disappearing. He's not heartless, but he doesn't get tied down. The film introduced a subplot about a teenage girl, Samantha, who might be his daughter. This felt forced and out of character for Reacher. Instead of making the story more compelling, the father-daughter angle slowed the film down and took away from what made Reacher interesting. Rather than focusing on his intelligence, toughness, and ability to outthink his enemies, much of the movie was spent on an awkward family dynamic that didn't fit the tone of the franchise. The Tom Cruise problem. One of the most controversial aspects of the Jack Reacher films has always been the casting of Tom Cruise. In the books, Reacher is described as a physically imposing figure, 6'5", 250 pounds, with an intimidating presence. Cruise, at 5'7", was always a mismatch for the role. While his performance in the first film helped mitigate those concerns, in Never Go Back, the issues became more apparent. Reacher is supposed to be a near unstoppable force, but in Never Go Back, he often felt more like a standard action hero. His fight scenes lacked the sheer brutality that made the first movie work. Additionally, Cruise's age was beginning to show, making it harder to buy him as an unbeatable brawler. While Cruise is a phenomenal action star, his portrayal of Reacher in the sequel felt less convincing. Dull villains and no real sense of threat. Great action thrillers need strong villains. The first Jack Reacher had Werner Herzog as a chilling, mysterious antagonist known as the Zek. He had a quiet menace that made him compelling. In contrast, Never Go Back had a forgettable, uninspired villain in the Hunter, Patrick Hoisinger. He was little more than a generic hitman with no real personality or backstory. Without a strong villain, the stakes never felt high. Reacher never seemed truly challenged, and the story felt like it was just going through the motions. A good antagonist should push the hero to his limits, but in this case, Reacher never seemed in any real danger. The franchise's identity crisis. Perhaps the biggest issue with Never Go Back was that it didn't seem to know what kind of movie it wanted to be. The first Jack Reacher had a unique tone. It was part detective story, part revenge thriller, with an almost noir-like feel. The sequel abandoned that in favor of a generic, watered-down action movie.